Elena Markovic had spent the last 3 years buried in dusty, mislabeled boxes deep within the silent underground vaults of the European archives in Brussels. Most days, her work consisted of cataloging forgotten correspondence, faded military maps, or wartime ration records, nothing that would ever change the world. But on this particular morning, she noticed a wooden box that didn't belong in the shelf section she was auditing. It was old, darker than the rest, and sealed shut with a brass clasp that looked untouched for decades. The label was wrong: agricultural imports, 1938 to 1940. Elena frowned. The box felt suspiciously heavy for simple import records. Curiosity won. She opened it. Inside, instead of farming documents, she found a collection of thin metal canisters containing microfilms, stacks of coded telegrams, and a leather-bound ledger with a faded insignia stamped on the cover. A serpent coiling around a balance scale. Beneath the symbol were the words, Die Schattenbankiers, a phrase she had never seen in any official World War II literature. She carefully fed one of the microfilms into an old reader. Numbers, transactions, and bank routes appeared, an intricate network of financial movements that didn't match any known wartime operations. These weren't government records. They were private, secret, and the amounts involved were staggering. Elena took notes, her heart racing. Every document seemed to point to a shadow circle of financiers who operated parallel to the Nazi regime funders, yes, but with their own agenda. Their transactions bypassed official German banks, flowing instead into neutral countries like Switzerland, Portugal, and Turkey. Then she saw something that froze her breath, a series of post-war dates. The transactions didn't stop in 1945. They continued for years, decades, even under slightly altered aliases, but unmistakably following the same coded patterns. She turned to the ledger. Inside it were photographs clipped to pages, grainy images of men in formal suits, faces stern, eyes unreadable. Several entries listed post-war arrangements, identity transitions, and economic reallocation plans. It was as if these men had planned their survival far ahead of Hitler's fall. At first, Elena thought she had uncovered a small circle of corrupt bankers who escaped justice. But then she noticed a modern signature, a current European Central Bank official's name on a document dated 1944, written in the same distinctive pen as the older signatures. Impossible. Either the name had been reused by a descendant, or the family's influence never ended. Cold dread washed over her. She rushed upstairs to consult her mentor, Professor Armin Keller. When she showed him the serpent insignia, the color drained from his face. He whispered, "You should not have found this," then abruptly closed the ledger and insisted she leave it alone. Hours later, he vanished without returning her calls. And in that moment, Elena realized she had stumbled onto something far bigger than a forgotten archive box. Something someone had gone to great lengths to hide, and perhaps was still hiding today. Elena barely slept the night after Professor Keller's disappearance. His fearful reaction replayed in her mind like a warning siren. Keller had faced war criminals, declassified intelligence, and political scandals during his career, yet nothing had ever shaken him like the serpent insignia of Die Schattenbankiers. Determined to understand what he had feared, Elena returned to the documents. She created a timeline connecting the coded transactions from the 1940s to modern corporations and investment groups operating in Europe. A disturbing pattern emerged. Companies that had flourished dramatically after the war, seemingly fueled by invisible capital, were all linked to obscure heritage foundations that matched the names in the ledger. But the most unsettling discovery came when she traced one of the foundations to a major multinational energy conglomerate. Its board members mirrored the surnames of the shadow bankers, slightly altered, modernized, but undeniably connected. This wasn't a historical anomaly. It was a bloodline. Elena realized she needed expert help, someone who understood intelligence patterns, shell corporations, and covert financial systems. She contacted Jonas Reed, a former European intelligence analyst turned private researcher. Jonas was skeptical at first, but when Elena showed him the microfilms, his professional detachment evaporated. "I've heard whispers about this," he admitted, lowering his voice. "A group operating behind markets and political systems, no ideology, only influence. Some analysts call them the invisible creditors." He explained that after World War II, certain financiers who had quietly aided the Nazi regime were never prosecuted because they weren't the official party members. Instead, they positioned themselves as economic advisors during Europe's reconstruction. Their wealth-stolen art, smuggled gold, secret accounts did not disappear. It multiplied. Jonas revealed that intelligence reports over the decades hinted at coordinated interventions during major European financial crises, sudden stock market rescues, inexplicable buyouts, and debt settlements that benefited unknown investors. But the evidence had always vanished before anyone could act. Elena's stomach tightened. It meant someone powerful had been erasing the truth for decades. As they worked together, Jonas noticed subtle signs that they were being watched: an unfamiliar black car parked near Elena's apartment, anonymous calls with only static, a laptop intrusion attempt that left no trace. Someone had realized they were digging too deeply. Yet their investigation only accelerated. They uncovered that the shadow bankers controlled real estate firms buying key European capitals, shipping companies rooted in wartime smuggling routes, media outlets influencing public sentiment, financial consulting groups embedded in government advisory panels. These families didn't advertise themselves. They didn't run for office. They didn't need to. Their power came from debt, and nations, just like individuals, could be controlled by the ones who held their loans. The final clue came when Elena cross-referenced names from the ledger with modern economic reports. One surname repeated frequently, always tied to large-scale financial decisions involving multiple EU countries. The same surname Keller had reacted to before disappearing. Elena felt a chill. This wasn't just research anymore. She had stepped into a network that thrived in silence, protected by wealth older than the European Union itself. And now they knew her name. Elena and Jonas traveled to Switzerland under a cloud of unease, guided by the trail left in the old ledger. Every clue pointed toward Zurich, the historic heart of discreet banking, where secrecy was tradition and anonymity a luxury purchased by the world's most powerful. The microfilms had mentioned a family archive stored under an alias in a private vault, one used by the original members of Die Schatten Bankiers. When they arrived, Elena felt the weight of the city's quiet orderliness. Everything seemed immaculate, controlled, and impenetrable, much like the people they pursued. Jonas used an old intelligence contact to access the vault records. One name stood out: Vogel Stiftung, a philanthropic foundation that appeared harmless on the surface. But the surname Vogel appeared multiple times in the 1944 ledger as one of the founding bankers who had worked behind the scenes to channel Nazi wealth into secret accounts. The modern Vogels were billionaires, owners of a global investment empire with influence over energy, shipping, and digital finance. But what clenched Elena's breath was discovering that their fortune did not originate in post-war business brilliance, as public biographies claimed, but from systematically laundered Nazi assets. They weren't the only ones. The ledger showed the origins of 3 more modern dynasties, each built upon hidden wartime capital. Together, these families formed the financial skeleton of Europe, quiet, invisible, omnipresent. Inside the vault, Elena found what she feared: letters written by the original bankers outlining their survival strategy after the war. They did not consider themselves loyal to Hitler or Nazism. Instead, they viewed the Reich as merely a temporary vessel in opportunity. Their true vision was borderless control through financial leverage, a power more enduring than dictators or armies. A chilling line written in precise German script read, "Nations fall, debts remain. Power belongs to those who own the debts." These men had used the chaos of war to accumulate immense wealth, and when the Third Reich collapsed, they simply changed their names, funding reconstruction efforts to appear as saviors rather than thieves. As Elena deciphered more documents, she realized that these families had developed a generational system of influence. Each descendant inherited not only wealth but also a role, one overseeing shipping routes, one embedded in global banking, one connected to media networks, and another influencing political think tanks. They didn't need governments, they shaped governments. Jonas analyzed recent market data and discovered suspiciously timed trades linked to companies owned by these families. The patterns suggested foreknowledge of political decisions policies influenced by advisors who served as the shadow bankers' public faces. The eerie consistency of their reach terrified Elena. Every step of European economic development, from currency unions to international trade deals, had been quietly steered by individuals whose family histories were erased and rewritten. Leaving Zurich, Elena felt the full magnitude of what they had uncovered. This was no outdated conspiracy. The documents from the Swiss vault led Elena and Jonas to a terrifying conclusion. The shadow banking dynasties had not just shaped Europe's past, they were engineering its future. The more Elena studied the files, the more she realized the bankers' operations were not chaotic or opportunistic. They followed a timeline, a strategy, a sequence of long-term economic manipulations planned with the patience of a chess master willing to wait decades for the final move. That strategy had a name: the Europa Protocol. The first reference appeared in a folder marked with the serpent insignia. It was dated 1951, barely 6 years after the war. At first glance, it resembled standard post-war economic analysis, but hidden within dense paragraphs of financial jargon were coded annotations that matched the cipher from the 1940s documents. Jonas decrypted the codes, revealing an outline of a multi-stage plan to leverage Europe's future debt crises as tools of control. The protocol described triggering localized financial weaknesses that would push certain countries into dependency on emergency loans provided by shadow-controlled financial institutions. Through these institutions, the families would gain influence over national budgets, policy decisions, and trade agreements. What armies and governments could not achieve, debt chains would. For decades, the protocol hinted, the cabal had tested small-scale financial interventions, buying strategic debt, manipulating commodity prices, orchestrating subtle bank runs, all without leaving fingerprints. Now the final phase was approaching, cryptically titled Die große Konsolidierung, the Great Consolidation. Elena and Jonas cross-referenced the timeline with current events and were stunned. Several European nations were quietly negotiating economic reforms that would centralize their financial oversight under a private consortium acting as a stability guarantor. That consortium, Jonas confirmed, was a shell structure linked to one of the shadow banker families. If approved, the plan would hand unprecedented economic authority to an unelected financial body controlled by descendants of wartime opportunists. Elena knew they had to expose this. They attempted to contact journalists, economists, and human rights groups. But everywhere they turned, they hit barriers: stories rejected, questions ignored, emails deleted before being read. One reporter agreed to meet them but canceled at the last minute, sending a single cryptic message. "They already knew what you were going to tell me." Surveillance intensified. Elena noticed unfamiliar faces lingering too long near her apartment. Jonas's phone showed signs of silent monitoring, the kind that only sophisticated agencies or billionaires could perform. More chilling still, Files they had saved disappeared from encrypted drives deleted remotely. Then came a message from an unknown number. Stop. You do not understand what you're interfering with. But the turning point arrived when a mysterious figure contacted them under the code name Orion. He claimed to be a defecting insider, someone raised within the system who could no longer accept the consequences of the Europa Protocol. If you want proof, he said in a modulated voice, I will give it to you. But understand, after this, there is no going back. For the first time, Elena realized the cabal was not entirely unified. Somewhere within its cold ranks, a fracture had formed. And fractures, she knew, were where revolutions began. Orion's decision to defect changed everything. Elena and Jonas met him in an abandoned railway warehouse on the outskirts of Luxembourg, a symbolic location. He said, since much of the shadow bankers' post-war smuggling routes once ran through these lines. Orion stood in the dim light wearing a hooded coat that concealed most of his face. His voice was distorted through a device. Anonymity wasn't a preference, it was survival. I was raised in the system you're trying to expose, he began. My family believes loyalty is inherited, just like wealth. But loyalty built on blackmail, corruption, and stolen history is not loyalty, it's imprisonment. From a secure case, he produced encrypted drives, handwritten journals, and meeting transcripts signed by high-ranking members of the Schattenbankier's Modern Council. The documents confirmed everything Elena and Jonas suspected and more. They detailed shell corporations controlling Europe's energy infrastructure, political lobbying disguised as charity, black budget slush funds, and secret arrangements with intelligence operatives willing to look the other way. But the most damning document was a signed agreement between the four ruling families authorizing the launch of Phase 5 of the Europa Protocol, the stage that would finalize their control over Europe as financial sovereignty. Orion warned them, you must move quickly. In 72 hours, the Council of Five will meet to approve the final consolidation of debt under a private institution they control. When that happens, no government will regain independence without their permission. Armed with the evidence, Elena and Jonas planned to deliver everything to an international economic tribunal. They knew exposing the truth required undeniable proof and global attention. But before they could act, the cabal struck. Jonas disappeared. He had been on his way to meet a contact in Luxembourg's financial district when his car was found abandoned near the river. His phone lay crushed on the pavement. For Elena, panic gave way to rage. She refused to abandon him or the truth. Orion revealed that Jonas had likely been taken to prevent the leak of information. The cabal's method was always the same: silence the threat, erase the records, rewrite the narrative. But for once, they had underestimated their opponent. Elena wasn't motivated by money or power. She was driven by truth, and now, by loyalty. Working with Orion, she infiltrated the location where the Council of Five planned to meet, a private underground chamber beneath a luxury conference center in Luxembourg. The chamber was protected by biometric locks, hidden passages, and layers of security remnants of wartime bunker designs upgraded over decades. Elena managed to hack into the chamber's secure audiovisual system using Orion's access codes. As the council discussed the final approval of the Europa Protocol, Elena broadcast their meeting live across the world news networks, government channels, social media platforms. The shadow bankers' confessions, financial records, and corruption schemes poured into the public sphere in real time. Public shock was immediate. Governments called emergency sessions. Security forces stormed the meeting. Members of the council tried to flee, but the world had finally seen the truth. Yet amid the chaos, Elena only had one thought: where was Jonas? The cabal was crumbling, but her battle was far from over. The fallout from the global broadcast erupted like a shockwave across Europe. For the first time in history, the world saw the faces, signatures, and voices of the families who had quietly shaped its financial destiny for generations. International task forces raided corporate headquarters, froze bank accounts, and issued arrest warrants for the Council of Five. News anchors referred to it as the greatest economic revelation since the end of World War II. But Elena's mind wasn't on the headlines. She was haunted by one question: where was Jonas? Authorities found traces of him in a private holding facility owned by a logistics company tied to the Vogel dynasty. With the cabal's structure collapsing, their loyal security forces began abandoning posts, leaving behind scrambled files and panicked messages. Following these clues, Elena and an international investigative unit stormed the facility. They found Jonas bruised but alive, chained to a soundproof interrogation cell. When Elena saw him, exhaustion and relief collided in her chest. He managed a faint smile. "You didn't stop," he whispered. "You knew I wouldn't," she replied. Jonas's rescue became a symbolic moment for the movement that had sparked across Europe, a call to dismantle not just the visible members of the cabal, but the invisible architecture they had built over decades. Yet the victory was far from absolute. During the tribunal hearings, Elena realized that only a fraction of the shadow network had been captured. The Council of Five, the most visible heads, had been exposed, but beneath them existed hundreds of shell organizations, offshore trusts, and generational alliances unaffected by the arrests. These entities dissolved or relocated overnight. Their funds shifted to encrypted digital currencies, their influence preserved behind new corporate masks. Even more unsettling was the way certain world leaders reacted. Some called for justice and transparency. Others hesitated, fearing economic destabilization. A few even attempted to minimize the scandal, hinting at political ties no one had previously suspected. Elena was invited to speak before the tribunal. She presented the ledger, the microfilms, the documents Orion had risked his life to give them. Her words were precise yet heavy with the weight of what she now understood. "You cannot destroy a shadow by breaking the object that casts it. You must create light powerful enough to reveal everything it hides." Her testimony shifted global opinion, but Elena sensed resistance from forces still in the dark. Weeks later, life returned to a fragile version of normal. Jonas recovered and joined a global task force investigating financial crimes. Orion vanished without a trace. Some said he fled. Others believed the remnants of the cabal hunted him. Elena returned to Brussels, where she began writing a comprehensive report on the true history of Die Schattenbankiers. One evening, as she sat reviewing her notes, her laptop flickered. A new encrypted message appeared on her screen, anonymous, untraceable. "The bankers never die. They reorganize. And we are watching you." Elena stared at the glowing words. Outside her window, Brussels shimmered peacefully under the night sky, unaware of the next chapter forming in the shadows. She closed the laptop gently. The war against silence was just beginning.